Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Joker. Now, Joker is a graphic novel written by Brian Azzarello and illustrated by Lee Bermejo, and of course published by DC Comics. Now, this features the character of the Joker, who is primarily a Batman villain, and the character was originally created by Bob Kane Bill Finger and Jerry Robinson. Now, this was published in 2008, and this is specifically set outside of the mainstream Batman continuity. It's set in its own universe, and you could argue that it's more of a grounded Batman universe because the book really does read as more of a dark and gritty crime novel than it does a superhero comic. Now, I already did a review on this a couple of years ago, but I wanted to redo it because over the years, this really has become one of my favorite, not just Batman comics, but one of my favorite graphic novels in general. And this book is really a psychological character study on the Joker, but it's primarily told from the point of view of one of the Joker's henchmen, which I thought was really interesting. Now, the plot of Joker is it follows this low-level thug named Johnny Frost who wants to be taken more seriously, and he desires to be a big-shot criminal, and he wants people to know his name. So, in the beginning of the story, he's working for these guys who used to work for the Joker before the Joker was sent off to Arkham Asylum, but now the Joker is being released from Arkham Asylum. How or why that happened, nobody is able to figure out. So Johnny volunteers to pick the Joker up, and throughout the story he becomes more or less the Joker's right-hand man, and throughout the story the Joker's trying to get revenge on people who screwed him over in the past, particularly this crime lord named Harvey Dent, who we would know better as Two-Face. Now, since this is set in an alternate Batman universe, it's hard to say if the Harvey Dent of this story has the same backstory as the Harvey Dent that we know, but just to be safe, I'll say that he does. That he was Gotham City's former district attorney who had split personality disorder, and then when he got half of his body burned, that allowed his alternate personality to take over. I do think it's interesting how Harvey Dent never refers to himself as Two-Face in this. The only person who ever refers to him as Two-Face is the Joker, and he does it as more of an insult. Other familiar Batman villains who show up in this story are Killer Croc, and I mentioned how Johnny Frost kind of became the Joker's right-hand man in this story, but the more that I think about it, I would say that would more apply to Killer Croc, because Joker and Killer Croc work very closely together in this story. And this definitely seems to be a more grounded in reality Killer Croc. Like, yeah, he still has scaly skin, but he looks a lot more human than most iterations of this character. The Penguin also shows up in this story, and so does the Riddler, and I actually really liked the Riddler's look in this comic. Harley Quinn also shows up in here. In this comic, she's actually a stripper at this strip club that the Joker used to own, and fans of this character might be kind of disappointed because even though she's in most of the comic, she has no lines of dialogue in the story. Like, I hate to say it, but throughout a lot of this comic, she's kind of just there, so if you're a Harley Quinn fan, I could see you being disappointed in that regard. Now, Batman doesn't actually show up in this story till the end, because this really isn't a Batman story. This is a Joker story, but I thought it was really interesting to see Batman 100% from the villain's perspective. And I liked how this really did sort of return a mystique to this character, because even though we as the reader know who Batman is, the characters within the universe of this story do not know who Batman actually is. And Batman's almost not even treated as a human character in this story, but when you see him at the end, it's like you're being confronted with something mythic and something legendary. I also really liked Batman's look in this comic. Like, you could tell that it's very much inspired by the Christopher Nolan Batman, yet a lot less high-tech this really does feel like a more grounded, more reality-based Batman, even more so than the Christopher Nolan version of the character. Even though, as I said, there is sort of this mythic quality about the character, but that's only because this is told 100% from the point of view of the criminals that Batman goes after. Now, the Joker in this comic is legitimately pretty freaking terrifying. He's pretty much chaos incarnate. Like, yes, he is out for revenge. He's out to take back money that was stolen from him. He's out to take back territory that was stolen from him. But more and more you start to realize that this is all just an excuse to raise hell. He is pretty much an agent of chaos, an agent of anarchy. Now, the Joker in this comic looks a lot like Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. Like, it's almost a combination between the Heath Ledger Joker and the classic Joker. Now, the Heath Ledger, Christopher Nolan version of the Joker was really just a crazy guy who had these two scars on his cheeks, which gave him the appearance of an elongated smile, and he painted himself up to look like a clown, whereas the Joker in the comics legitimately had chalk white skin and blood red lips, which gave him the appearance of a clown. This version of the Joker is almost an amalgamation of both, where he does have white skin and blood red lips and green hair, but he also has the two scars on his cheeks. Now, this came out the same year as The Dark Knight. I'm not sure which one came first. Like, I'm not sure if this comic was published first or if The Dark Knight came out first, but Lee Bermejo claims that this version of the Joker, he actually had sketches of it back in 2006. And the character of Johnny Frost is really interesting. Like, I would almost say that both him and the Joker are dual protagonists in the story. Now, Frost is a bad guy, but he's still a three-dimensional character, and that's what's so interesting about this comic is it's told from the point of view of people that we would normally consider to be bad people. And in the beginning of the story, Johnny very much admires the Joker, and he sees the Joker as sort of his way of becoming a big shot, but as the story goes on, he starts to really realize how much of a psychopath the Joker really is. But by the time he realizes that he's in way over his head, it's sort of too late. Like, he looked into the abyss, and the abyss did not just look back at him, but it freaking laughed in his face. Now, in the graphic novel, you meet Johnny's ex-wife, and you realize that they do have kids. And there's one moment where you see a picture of Johnny and his wife and his kids together, and there is sort of this implication that there was a time when they were happy. It's also really interesting how throughout the story Johnny wants to be a big shot, but by the end of the story he does not get what he wants at all. Like, it's almost like this tragic, fucked up version of the American dream gone wrong. And Johnny is so loyal to the Joker, and he even saves the Joker's life at one point, but even with that, the Joker is still willing to shoot this guy in the face. But Joker by Brian Azzarello is an excellent graphic novel, and it's an excellent way of taking these characters and really sort of grounding them and making this story as reality-based as a story like this could possibly be. I would argue even more so than the Nolan films. And it's an excellent crime novel. As I pointed out already, this reads more like a dark and gritty crime thriller than it does a superhero story. Like, it's a crime thriller that just happens to feature characters from the Batman mythos. And it's also an excellent character study on a psychopath. And I would rank this right alongside Alan Moore's The Killing Joke as one of the best Joker stories. Now, just be warned that this is not for kids at all. There are some moments in this story that are brutally violent. Like, there's a scene in this where Joker and Harley Quinn take this guy who used to work for the Joker backstage, and then when he comes out, all except for his head and hands is skinned. There's also a scene where the Joker rapes somebody, so again, this is not for kids at all. This is a very adult story. And Lee Bermejo's artwork in this graphic novel is excellent. Like, there are some panels that are very comic booky, but then there are certain panels that are almost photorealistic in the way that they're drawn, and I actually really like it. Like, his artwork is really quite beautiful. I particularly like this image of the Joker right here. This is actually one of my favorite images of this character. Now, Johnny Frost would show up in the movie Suicide Squad, and I guess that's another reason I have not to like that movie, because I didn't even find out till much later that that character was supposed to be Johnny Frost. Now, just last year, Brian Azzarello and Lee Bermejo did a limited series called Batman Damned, which I think is actually supposed to be in the same continuity as this book, but it has Batman teaming up with Deadman and John Constantine, and I wanted to read that so freaking badly. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get my hands on any issues, but I know there was some controversy surrounding that comic book series, because apparently at one point you see Batman's dick. So yeah, that was my review on Joker, written by Brian Azzarello and illustrated by Lee Bermejo, and bye.